evening's event. So, and the panelists also have their own information out there, and as courtesy, please stop by and see if they have information that might interest you. We also have some sign-ups for the Green Living series if you'd like to be notified of future movies and other events. It kind of keeps you up to date on what's going on Green Living series-wise. So, but please see the information out there as part of the education process for this evening. So this evening we have 4 panelists, and usually I facilitate the discussion, but I probably won't facilitate too much because this isn't really a controversial evening, so it's more informational, so it'll be more directed at you with questions, if that's okay. But if the panelists would go down and introduce themselves and their specialty background, to get us started, that would be terrific. So, Lauren, how about we start with you?
So I was going to offer to go last so that I could fill in
but
the
you're first.
fill in the empty spot.
No, that's okay. You go ahead.
So, yeah, my name's Lauren Chase-Rowell, and in the late 70s we started homesteading, and I discovered Bill Mollison's books, and they were the closest thing to describe kind of what we were doing and how we were living. And I became a landscape designer, and what I really like about permaculture incorporated into landscape design is that it just uses so many of the things that I believe that you can see in nature. Before I became a landscape designer, I had raised my family's food for 10 years, and organically, so it was sort of like in landscape school, the same principles about what's good for organic food wasn't the same for what's good for landscaping. So working that backwards and kind of unlearning and doing that, and then just using natural systems to mimic think about how exciting a landscape is. I mean, you can grow food, you can have animals, you can have beauty, you can get outside, you can make your spaces relate with the inside, with the outside, etc., etc. So landscapes really incorporate a lot of sustainable access, and it's just a great.
Okay. Josh?
Okay, so I'm Josh, and I was in the movie, and I'll be as brief as possible because I really want to hear what the panelists have to say tonight. I guess you probably all heard enough from me. I would say that we made this movie in December, like at night, over all this footage that we had compiled, and we tried to make sense of permaculture, which was really sort of hard. And for 40 minutes, it's a lot of information, but it's much more complex than that. And I would say that doing this production and everything, I never really had this vision of what's happening. This is the first one. I'm going around and showing it at different places. And it's really great to see all these practical, sort of hands-on kind of people get together to see a movie. And I hope that more stuff happens because you guys all come together. It's really good to see this movement happening in Concord.
Thank you.
It's cool.
My name is Doran Cox. I'm a board member of the New England Farmers Union, which is an organization that's formed to unify agricultural policy of the New England states and actually have a voice for the first time, so that our type of agriculture is actually represented the next time the Farm Bill comes around. So if you want to talk about that more after this, I'd be happy to do that. I'm also a farmer, part of 4 generations that lives in Lee, New Hampshire. We farm a little over 300 acres, farm and forest, but we're also doing a lot. It's good to see a lot of the principles, and each farmer has their own. Their landscape is the canvas, but a lot of the biological principles are all the same, and those are universal. So a lot of what we're doing is looking at trying to close those energy loops, and we're growing. Looking at introducing more diversity into our crops. So we're growing grains and oil seeds, as well as market gardens and perennial crops. And really, in my doctorate research, UNH is focused on increasing the carbon in soil, increasing soil health while increasing productivity, while still reducing our off-farm inputs. So directly applicable, and we're doing a lot with really reducing the amount of energy it takes to transition from one crop to another by allowing, just as Josh was saying, allowing the biology to help with that transition, setting up the right combination of plants and animals to help that transition and set that natural competition up to get the result that you want while adding biology every step of the way.
Great, thank you. Steve?
And I'm Steve Whitman, coming from the town of Plymouth. I'm a permaculture instructor working with Lauren on a class that starts next week, Kobe Sawyer, and working with Josh on a course, the second course for permaculture at D Acres, which starts in April. So I'm working as a permaculture instructor. I'm also an adjunct faculty member at Plymouth State University, and then work as a consultant here in New Hampshire, working with towns on energy and community planning issues. I live in downtown Plymouth on a half an acre, so one of my primary interests, aside from seeing people apply permaculture in a way that makes sense for them, for whatever it is that they need to do, whether it's for rethinking their business or rethinking their property or rethinking their lifestyle, I'm really interested in seeing people apply it where they are. So I'm 8 years into applying it where I am on a half an acre and converting what was pretty much kind of suburban scale lawn into food forest and opportunities for myself and my family to actually produce what we need. So I'm enjoying the adventure. Happy to be here tonight.
Great, thank you very much. So before we open up to you folks, for me, watching the movie, it felt like an overview of permaculture. So each of you comes to the panelists with your own little expertise and probably an area that is a little bit more dear to yourselves, or maybe an experience that you'd like to share. If you can each, well, just this might not apply to you, but maybe it wasn't something in the movie. But if each of you can add to the movie that either is your expertise or a pearl of wisdom that wasn't in the movie that you can share before we open up the questions, I'd like to see what you have to say.
So I would say that one thing that wasn't really covered in the movie was, if you think about the human being and our big brains and our big hearts and how little of that we really use. To me, if you want to be sustainable, you would start at home, closest to home, which is the individual. And so one thing about permaculture for me is we have earth care, people care, and fair share. And the people care part to me is really important in terms of starting with myself. So taking really good care of myself and being really mindful. And the more mindful I become over the years, I can't do unsustainable practices. And it's just a really important practice. So I would say that mindfulness and however people get there, and being in the moment and really observing and interacting and applying those kinds of things to your everyday life is probably one of the most sustainable things people in this country could do right now to change how we do practice.
Thank you. Josh, anything you want to add to the movie you produced?
No, I would say that's great.
Okay, great. Dorn, anything on your farm you want to add to what Josh is doing?
Yeah, well, I guess I could give some examples. Josh and I talked a little bit before that these, and I mentioned it a little earlier, that these principles hold at all sorts of different scales, and the big variable to productivity is the people's attention to the detail of managing those systems, and these productive systems really require a different level of attention to that detail. And so what that means really is that we need more farmers in order to have our land be more productive per acre. So if we look, at what our land resource is here in New Hampshire, we have over 40% of our land is actually in agricultural soils, and yet, say, over 3 million acres, and we're using about 138,000 acres of those. We have about 3,000 full-time farmers in this state, and that's why we only produce 5% of our food, and we're only producing 5% of our energy from our land base, and yet we have this, we have 4.8 million acres of forest that we're not managing to this and increasing its productivity and adding carbon back into the soil. We're not managing it, and that variable again is people. So, and it's not that we need 60% of our population doing this. There are other places where they're able to provide full food and food security at around 2%. So that you're only looking at 20,000 people, or instead of a farm, 138 acre farm, which is the normal size in New Hampshire, with one farmer managing that, or maybe a couple. What we need is 15 people managing a piece of land about that size. And then you can start to get this kind of productivity that would actually provide for 1.3 million people here in the state.
Thank you. Interesting. Steve?
I think my biggest focus or my biggest interest is in finding lower energy solutions for problems. And that's one of the things that attracted me to permaculture. And I think, like maybe many people in this room, when I first was attracted to permaculture, it was like, okay, well, I like this system. This is a system of holistically looking at things and taking the time to really observe and analyze what's going on and understand relationships before trying to create solutions or match things up. And I think I came to it very naively, thinking it was something I would quickly learn how to do, apply, and move on and learn other things. And the real gift, I think, in permaculture is that when you get hooked by it, when you get to start to understand some of the tools and kind of the lens that it gives you to look at problems, it's a lifetime of learning. So the way that I've learned that the three other panelists have addressed problems and the information that I've received from them, from areas that they know much better than me, are a constant gift that kind of keeps on giving. So it's, as an instructor, I think one of the best things that I tell people is when they get involved, however they decide to really learn about permaculture and however they decide to apply it, it's a journey. And it doesn't happen overnight, and there's no final point.
Yeah, wonderful, great. Okay, so let's open up questions. I'm sure there are lots, like where do you begin? So anybody want to ask? Start. Go ahead. Yes.
I'll start. Josh, your farm is located fairly, I don't know, like an hour and a half north of here, an hour north?
Yeah, there's about.
So you sort of deal in, I mean, we're all in a fairly high zone for climate. How has that surprised you, and how has it hindered you in your process of creating this landscape?
You mean as far as the cold?
Yeah, I mean, we're cold a lot of the time.
Yeah, just talking it through, there's a lot of benefits to being in a cold climate and a cold climate garden. I think we have less incidence of fungal problems and insect problems. It also gives us as people a break. I grew up in North Carolina, and with the techniques that we have at our disposal with greenhouses and passive solar, there wouldn't be a stop to it. So it's nice to have that break, and it's nice to have that time for reflection and research in our lives. I like the variability of the diet as well. I think that it builds the diversity of our food system rather than perhaps we would be more inclined to just be growing one, if we lived in the Midwest, maybe we'd be just corn farmers, you know. So, but we actually have more like three substantial growing seasons within every year.
Anybody want to add to the climate challenge?
Oh, I would say that there is an advantage in that you can use winter kill cover crops, which is a great way to transition from one crop to another. So if you plant, say, vetch and oats or peas and oats, you can have it kill for the next year, and it's available for the spring seeding. Whereas if you're in a different climate, you don't have as many options. And actually, one of the things I'm most excited about, I don't know if you've tried it yet, but the tillage radish for breaking up soil compaction. It's a radish that's designed to, with a really deep taproot. And so you plant it in the late summer and it pushes through up to 3 feet deep, and then it kills over the winter. And all those nutrients that it sucked up and all that, those channels are left for the next crop. So it's the sort of thing that you wouldn't have that. It would be a pest. It would be if you were in a southern climate.
Interesting. Anybody?
I would just throw out there, we saw it in the film a little bit, but season extension, in which is something that any one of us can work with, and all of us are doing in different ways. But the ability to extend that season in the fall for some of the crops that you've planted late summer, or to have those greens like Josh showed in December in the cold frame inside the greenhouse, it's quite a triumph, especially if you live in a neighborhood, to be out there, Christmas Eve, cutting the last greens while there's snow around your cold frame. So there are things that we can do that extend the season, that don't bring it through the winter and aren't as energy intensive, but give us some alternatives.
And then I'd just like to add, kind of philosophically, if we knew really well the plants that grow in the place that we live, and we knew the interrelationships of those plants with the animals and the kinds of things that keep disease in check and keep our water clean and our air clean, if we had a relationship with the plants wherever we live, no matter how far north, we would always have enough food to eat. So I would just try to encourage everybody to know their sense of place and to know where you live and to know what's available for medicine and food and the patterns of animals and the way everything works together, instead of like hoping that you can have lettuce in February, that type of thing.
Yes.
Wanted to ask Doran, how are you doing with lowering your inputs from off farm? What are you doing to bring more of what you need from your own soil?
Oh, a lot of that's with cover cropping, especially, and also through using less tillage so we really reduce the amount of fuel that we need, and also moving to some draft animal work as well. We're not exclusively one way or the other, but it's a lot of different strategies. But especially for just really bumping up the biological cycle, so you always have something growing and then returning back to the soil, and then using animals to cycle those nutrients. The faster you can cycle those, the more productivity you're going to have, and the more soil you're going to be building, if you're not constantly losing it to decomposition.
Yes, sir.
I assume that rain is an important part of irrigation. I mean, is acid rain today still a major factor in farming? Is it detrimental to the crops still, or is that something that's sort of getting under control with more clean scrubbing of plants that generate this type of environment, acid rain?
Anybody?
Well, I could say sort of a perverse thing is that phosphorus levels are starting to be a problem in some areas, because there used to be a lot more phosphorus coming with the acid rain. So now for the first time in some farms, they're actually having to add it. But that's
You're having to add it?
because the pollution's really gone.
It's gone down.
It's gone down, okay.
Right, that's what
okay.
I was hoping you'd say.
Yeah, so it's kind of an unforeseen.
Does that play a factor, Josh, into your,
I think as far as our water catchment, our rainwater catchment, we're more or less living with what we got. I think the things we're trying to do on the physical landscape, as far as filtering the water with plants, are the way to go with the long term.
Okay.
And,
thank you.
Yes. Come on, don't be shy. Yes, in the back.
Josh, I'm not quite sure I'm going to phrase the question quite right, but when you started the acres, what was the first thing that you set out to do, or the first project or construction that you did? And then the second part of the question would be, what would you do differently now, knowing what you know, or knowing what you know now?
Yep.
boy. Well, it wasn't necessarily just me that started any of this. It's been a collaboration the whole way, and an evolution. What we first did when we got up to New Hampshire, we learned a lot through errors. And we more or less came up in September and planted some garlic. And we were living in a barn. And the barn became, there's like a big building in the movie that has a commercial kitchen and a root cellar and the wood shop. And that building that we created was more or less conceptualized from living in a barn and trying to cook and prepare food and have accessibility for people of all ages. And so all the troubles that we ran into trying to make that work are the lessons that we learned that created the community building. So that, I guess that's, as far as what we do, if we had to do it over
Differently, yeah?
differently, gosh, I wish I had interned and apprenticed more places. Just been able, I mean, did lots of farm tours and spent a couple of years on the road trying to see different systems in action. But it was that is very important. And just trying to see different climatic zones and trying to get all this global information that's out there, accessible, and just seeing different things and trying different things and watching different systems that work.
Okay. Interesting. Jonathan, did you have a question?
Yeah, I had a question for Dorn about fuel and biofuels, and from what I'm aware, you might be producing some on your farm these days. As we move post, peak oil, and we've moved ourselves away from oil and gas, natural gas and that sorts, what do you think the future of biofuels or any of that kind of development might be here in the Northeast or worldwide? Is there potential good amount of source there, growing fuels on our farms?
Yeah, I mean, just like I said, it's a function of our productivity of our landscape, and we have the land. It's a matter of how we manage that and whether we're able to do that in a way if we can keep that productivity high enough without degrading the soil resources that make that possible. So biofuels are really a function of healthy soils, and you have to have healthy soil and then enough water and sunlight, and that's really, those are the key ingredients. But yeah, if you do sort of a BTU analysis, I mentioned the forests that we have, 1 ton per year is generally a good rule of thumb for unmanaged forests, and that, if you were to convert that, there are lots of different ways to convert it. Thermal is about the most efficient way you can take, just biomass and generate heat, which is a large part of, our energy use. Just with what we have there, we can provide a quarter of all BTU needs, not just thermal.
As far as like automobile, maybe biofuels and stuff like that?
Yeah, but then you have a lot of uses, like, for transportation use, you really need liquid fuels that are a lot more convenient to work with. So vegetable oil is a good source, but there are other ways to derive liquid fuels from wood gasification and so forth. But each of those, that further processing decreases your energy yield per acre significantly, because you're not getting you're not converting 100% of the mile. But in the case of biodiesel, for example, when you press the oil, that's a food product first. You're getting some energy out of it. You also get a feed product, high protein meal, which is true with sunflower or canola or soybean or flax. They all have they have both. And if you're working in an integrated system like we're talking about, and you have your animals right there, it's very efficient to feed your animals, and then they're feeding the crop. And just to give you what that means is, right now, farms in New Hampshire use about 4 million gallons of diesel fuel. It would take just a third of the acreage in one of these higher productive oil crops grown every year to provide all the fuel for these farms right now. So it's with it, and to at least get those farms. And those farms, if they were growing different things, could very easily, that same land area and that kind of energy use could easily provide enough food for the population. The energy requires managing, 50% of our, a couple million acres.
So when they say growing, peanuts, like as Josh said in the movie, we grew, you could grow your peanuts and put it into your
Yeah.
diesel engines, is that something that's actually sustainable, or is it?
Yeah, a good rule of thumb, when the horses, it used to be that you needed about 20% of your land area to feed your animals, to cultivate, to run the farm, and then everything else was a surplus. And that same type of equation holds true with biofuels, is that you'll need a percentage that will be dedicated to running the whole system. But as we get better in using the biology for the system, instead of just, putting plows in the ground, which are really energy intensive, and we use things like the tillage radish, we can drop that percentage way down. So, maybe we could, instead of using 20%, we do it carefully, maybe 5% of the land area is used to sustain, and the rest goes out of the system.
Okay, interesting. Anybody else? Yes, sir.
Steve, you talk about how complex permaculture is, and I think I can still get my head around permaculture at the level of a productive unit. What would a permaculture city look like?
Thanks, Leon. Having not seen one, I think what it would look like, and what we're starting to see in some communities here in New Hampshire, was something that started really organically, with lots of people experimenting in different ways and applying permaculture sites in different ways that made sense for the site and for the species on the sites and for the needs of the humans and other animals on the sites. And seeing those individual spots, almost like viruses, spread. And I think it would look so different in Plymouth than it would look in Nottingham or Lee or Dorchester or New London. But I think one of the best things about a permaculture city or a permaculture community, beyond what you could physically see, would be the network and the relationships. And I think that's one of the most valuable things I see with this permaculture movement in New Hampshire, beyond what any of us have actually physically done on our properties or other people's properties, or the relationships that we form, so that we have people that are resources, and we have people who have, seen problems and dealt with them in certain ways and learned from them. I think for everything I've seen Josh do successfully that I can learn from, also his willingness to share where he's had errors, as he said, where he's experimented and tried things that didn't work. So I think the permaculture city is different in the sense that you'd have to know each other and be willing to cooperate. That's my partial answer.
Yeah, great. Yes.
I'm just wondering, I guess for Josh, since you do primarily, you do 100% organic gardening, what is the role of pollinators and natural native animals to the landscape?
The pollinators, specifically insects and so forth?
And birds as well. And is that part of preserving the natural landscape and the goal of permaculture as well?
The pollination thing, there's definitely a large percentage, I think it's between 30 and 40 plants that, to gain the fruit, they need insect pollinators. It's not necessarily 50%, but it's a large percentage need the insect pollinators to actually make the fruit. It's not all wind driven, although lots of plants can just utilize wind to create sex that makes the fruit. As far as the birds to me are sort of indiscriminate killers as far as insects. They don't necessarily attack everything that you want them to, but they do provide beautiful music as well. As far as our overall, we use the chickens and the ducks to sort of, perhaps mimic something that is going on a larger scale in nature. The chickens or the fowl are in the large scale. Say the comparison is also often drawn to, say, Africa. On a large scale, you have herd animals running through, and then the fowl come through and actually clean the soil, all the parasites and so forth, so the next herd can come through. So that sort of thing is happening on some scale. The birds, to me, also carry seeds quite effectively, and so that as far as us introducing species to the property, the birds are very helpful with that.
Yes?
I have a question, I guess, more on the local scale of, so I guess you might be the one to answer this, but, you know, okay, so you live in Plymouth, we live in Concord, we have just about a half an acre of land, and, you know, we try to grow as much stuff as we can without having to go out and buy extra or fertilizers and things, but, I mean, we are limited in, we can't have certain animals, okay, any animals where we live, you know, that, you know, without, like, trying to buy off our neighbors with the eggs, but, you know, what other, I mean, how much of this could we actually take without, you know, having to go to the city council and urging them to allow us to have pigs and that kind of thing? I mean, how much of this can we practically?
Yeah, actually, just so that each panelist could answer her question, because I think a lot of us are small scale like that, and we can't do the pigs and the trees and everything, so if you can sort of give us baby steps going from traditional and maybe incorporating a little bit of the permaculture idea, and answer her question, that would be great. I think that would be nice, so.
Alright, I'll
Steve,
start.
Yeah, that'd be great.
I think at any scale, whether you're an apartment dweller or a small scale residential, there are lots of things you can do, and I think one of the things you can do is really to sit back and look at your property, your living unit, and your lifestyle, and try to look at them differently. It's everything from your purchasing habits, to your mode of transportation, to how you process your waste. Even an apartment dweller can decide to deal with their human waste differently. Can decide to reduce water consumption. So things that are happening even inside that unit, I think, are as important as whether or not you decide to have chickens or plant a pear tree or those types of things. So I would say starting within and taking the small steps. You know, for the people that haven't been early adopters of, you know, even cloth shopping bags and, you know, compact fluorescent bulbs, maybe they start there and then can feel good enough to have the outside compost bin, or to start to look at not transporting all their nutrients with 2 gallons of water to sewage treatment, but setting up their own composting system in their home. And going and seeing people that have done it, you know, getting out and visiting. You're next.
Oh, the area that I'd like to see more people focus on is take a piece of ground, whether it's you know, a quarter acre or 50 acres.
Smaller.
Or, yeah, but that the principles as far as that healthy soil are the same. And just take that piece of ground and say, I'm going to improve that. And that can be scientific. You can get soil tests, which is actually a really good thing to do. Cornell offers a soil health test, which will give you your biological as well as your physical properties, so you'll know about compaction and what kind of microbial activity you have. And then start to improve it and take that as a long-term project, because that is something that will produce whatever. And you can do that without animal agriculture. You can do that by varying the types and the diversity of plants and have that, get those natural systems, all those microbes really happy, and I think that's and then understanding that system translates to a whole different way of looking at the food you eat.
Josh, for the small scale.
Yeah, I think I tried to do a permaculture presentation like 10, 12 years ago to a garden club in New Hampshire. And the guy in the back of the room, you know, the old timer, said, well, that's just common sense. For 10 years, I've been trying to think of what to say to him. So I'm taking this opportunity, and it's not necessarily about common sense, but it's also a common language that we're developing. So when we talk about thermal mass, if that becomes common knowledge, then you start thinking about how to use thermal mass in your urban applications. And when you talk about stacking functions or multifunctionality, then you start to look at your situation and see the multidisciplinary integrated approach to problem solving that is common sense, but we also have this common language that we can use to apply to it.
So just building on that, I would say that in a really small scale application, it would be really important, anybody in this room can increase their net energy or their biodiversity on a lot. So we want lots of soil biology, lots and lots of diversity in the soil, which begets lots of diversity in plants. So flower borders, anything. You could do your own teas. I don't know where you all live, but if you did a quick analysis of your property, you could take advantage of sun and grow lots and lots of crops and eat as much diverse, healthy food as possible to make your insides and your intestinal fauna and flora as diverse as possible. Then, when you do this thing that Steve said, you like really check out every aspect in your own household, you might be able to start using gray water from your kitchen sink to water these beds. And it just builds like that. You could have roof gardens on your shed. You could have vertical gardens on the south wall. You could do espaliers. There's so many things you can do, and this is really important. On small acreages or little lots, we can't do everything. You might not be able to grow your year's worth of potatoes, but you might grow really good lemon balm tea. You might have a sweet little dryer, and you might be able to trade for 25 pounds potatoes for somebody like Ruth or Beth who has more land. So this is what Steve was talking about, when you have to really start cooperating. We're not used to that. We have the big rugged individualism going on. And we need to really start connecting and saying, like, you know, I could grow your garlic if you would grow, you know, like 6 batches of sweet corn for me. And that kind of barter, which brings in the whole permaculture idea of a different economy.
Okay, great. One more question. Yes.
This is sort of theoretical, and I guess Dorian didn't want to answer, but you were talking about using a certain percentage of land for biofuel, and I'm kind of thinking the big picture, like outside New Hampshire, outside the country, but sort of worldwide, in terms of using biodiesels, period, and then using valuable farmland to create these biodiesels. Do you have any thoughts on that, or I guess any, but I just because you happen to mention that, the biodiesels, but I just was wondering how farmers feel about this whole deal.
The issue is not the end fuel, it's the process that creates it.
Okay.
Because if you talk about ethanol or biodiesel or cellulosic ethanol, you could, and even if they're grown organically, you can degrade the soil and you can do all sorts of terrible things. What's really important is that you're actually following really healthy production practices and paying attention to the soil as your indicator. If you're adding carbon to the soil as you're doing it, then you have a net benefit. If you're losing it, and that's including it, if you look at that as your bank, and if you include the agricultural practices along with extraction that you're doing for petroleum products, if you follow what I'm saying. So I hope that's not too vague. It can be done sustainably, and in fact, the goal is in fact to get beyond carbon footprints, and we're actually adding carbon back into the soil where it's productive.
How do you add carbon back into the soil? I mean, I that's something you've all said, and maybe that's a dumb question, that's what it is, but what do you mean by adding carbon into the soil? How do you do that? Oh, I'm sorry, that's another question, but it just...
No, that's okay. Yeah.
I don't know if anybody else has that question.
Well, carbon is organic matter.
Right.
So...
Oh, just like food and compost?
Yeah, well, compost
okay.
is stable, but at some point, actually, this gets off to another topic, but it's challenging because every time you work with it, and the microbes are happier, they're constantly decomposing. So you reach a threshold, but most of the world's agricultural soils are severely deficient in organic matter. And that's because we've been able to substitute synthetic fertilizers for what would they naturally be feeding on, which is other recently dead organic matter. So the compost is a stable form that has all sorts of good soil properties. But you can also charcoal organic matter, and then when it's added, it's just like you imagine your activated carbon in your filter. It's a filter, it's a sponge, it holds on to all sorts of nutrients, and that doesn't decompose. It's not plant food, but it doesn't decompose. So that's a way you can actually add organic matter to the soil and it will stay for thousands of years. And you can do it year after year, and it accumulates.
Can I just add a quick response?
It's not the bag of charcoal, make sure you say.
No,
It's
not what you buy from the...
Burn poison.
Yeah.
But it is, but yeah, any any organic matter can be carefully sorted and control that way.
Okay. Steve, did you want to sort of add to?
I just wanted to add to your question on the fuel side, because it's, whether it's fuel or some of the other appropriate technologies that Josh showed in the film, these questions come up all the time. And everybody, I think, by nature wants to find the silver bullet to, fossil fuel use and other problems in the world. But even if there are ways, as Dorn started to outline, to really create some more sustainable fuel choices, we need to change our behavior. The scale of that, the consumption rate that we currently have, I mean, we're all pretty spoiled and pretty wasteful. So changing how we view these resources of any kind of appropriate technology or any kind of shift, I think is also really important.
Great. Well, I think that'll wrap it up. However, I think the panelists would be open for, after we go here, if anybody wants to come up and speak with them personally, I'm sure they're willing to entertain conversation. So, but thank you very much for coming this evening. This was terrific.